Appreciate it. Obviously, we've got a pretty good turnout this morning for what's an important time of the year. Anytime that we have the opportunity to communicate with our community on just where we are and give them a snapshot of what the current state of affairs are concerning public safety, that's a big deal, and that's what we're going to communicate this morning. In just a couple of moments, Deputy Chief Coerte Voorhees will be here to discuss the first quarter crime statistics for 2019. He's going to pull back the numbers and talk about some of the work also associated with those numbers, in addition to giving some context and perspective, especially around the area of violent crime. When he's through, we're going to kind of break with tradition somewhat today. We would traditionally have the Deputy Chief available for questions immediately following. We're going to delay that and push him back somewhat and defer to some other members of the community and partners that we have here in law enforcement, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jenny Sugar and Special Agent in Charge Dee Mateus with the Secret Service. They're both here this morning, along with some of our folks from criminal investigations and fraud, to talk about a large-scale criminal operation that they were able to help squelch not too long ago that's really going to have some impact on the community. So just wanted to set the table somewhat, let you know how things were going to play out, and without further delay, Deputy Chief Voorhees.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The CMPD ended the first quarter with an overall increase of crime of 4.6%. Property crime rose 3.4%, while violent crime jumped nearly 11% during this first quarter as compared to the first quarter of last year. And we'll give you a handout later detailing those numbers later this morning. But I want to start by talking about violent crime. That's where the majority of our focus has been this year so far. It's no secret that we've had a large increase, particularly in the number of homicides. We've had 33 this year. 33 is kind of a shocking number. We had 10 this time last year. It's a very large increase. Not proud of that number at all, but I can tell you that we're doing a lot of work to combat it. You know, the secret is we can't prevent everything. I wish we could. I really wish we could. Last week, had a young mother innocently killed, mother of two, while driving her car in our city. That should not happen. It's offensive that's the kind of result that can happen, but we realize that that's what happened when young people are involved in guns. One of those suspects was 17 years old. We're doing a lot of work dealing with this and working with incidents and also the violent criminal offenders that we know of. We've implemented a lot of things, but we can't do it alone. We need the public's help. Really, we need to change the culture. We need mentors, we need teachers, adults, neighbors, church members to help guide these young folks who need guidance, who need to learn how to take a slight without responding violently. Enough is enough. I don't ever want to become numb when something violent like this happens to some innocent person. It shouldn't become the norm. Again, we had 10 this time last year, 10 homicides, and that's 10 too many as well. Nearly 90% of our homicides involved a gun. The overwhelming majority of the victims knew their killers. We've had almost 1,000 victims of aggravated assault so far this year. A common factor continues to be people settling minor differences with gunfire and violence. But some of the work that we've done this year, we've combined gang and firearms detectives to work with crime reduction units and given them the freedom to travel anywhere in this city to impact some of these gangs and groups that are feuding with one another, where we know there's a high likelihood of retaliatory violence. Our targeted response and apprehension team, known as TRAP, is working with homicide very closely to identify witnesses, victims, and suspects, persons of interest in our homicides as soon as they occur, to help get closure to those cases faster, to help those cases move along. And then obviously our VCAT unit continues to do fantastic work once warrants are signed in apprehending these suspects quickly. Another thing we've done as a process is every day we get violent crime reports, and any gunshot incident is reviewed daily by a special investigations supervisor, and that supervisor has the authority to delegate work and tasks to other units throughout the organization. So that if you were a party to some incident, whether you were directly involved or not, and we think there's a way that we can impact that case so that there's no retaliation, they're doing that daily, and there's accountability as a part of that because we talk about it. We've increased our saturation patrols using our traffic enforcement officers. We've done dual sport motorcycles, our regular motors, putting them in areas not only to impact traffic safety, but also in areas where we experience high crime. And we've shifted our department's crime reduction units to those areas where historically we see violent crime to help break down those areas where we see large incidences of violent crime. We're going to continue to do that work. We're going to do everything we can to continue to fight this trend. The last few weeks, in terms of the numbers, they've been trending a little bit better in our favor, but we have a lot to do to catch up to what's been going on. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the victims of these crimes, and I think we all feel responsible for that and accountable to it. But again, we need the community's help. So we'll talk more about the specifics later and take questions, but right now, one of the things we've seen in our area over the last year specifically is groups of people who commit organized retail theft. Those normally just come up as shopliftings or larcenies. But what commonly happens is when these people are confronted, they either use force or use the threat of force. So they may become common law robberies or armed robberies based on that. And you know, we've been wondering, well, they're stealing, what are they doing? Who's buying the property? And so I'm going to pass it over here in a minute, and you'll hear about a case that we did last year with the cooperation of the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I can't stress enough how grateful I am that the speed at which this investigation took place was really incredible. So with that, I want to introduce Assistant U.S. Attorney Jenny Sugar, and she'll tell you about that case. Jenny?
Good morning. I'm Jenny Sugar. I'm a Deputy Criminal Chief at the Charlotte U.S. Attorney's Office in charge of white-collar crime. I'm also the Assistant U.S. Attorney who is assigned to the prosecution of Edwin Barkley, who was the owner of a Charlotte-based business called the Tool King. On March 20th of this year, just a couple weeks ago, Mr. Barkley pled guilty to interstate transportation of stolen property and admitted in federal court that from 2015 to 2018, he used his business as a fence and bought stolen merchandise from multiple boosters. He bought this merchandise from his boosters at a fraction of its retail price, and then he sold the goods online through retailers like eBay for a profit. He's now facing up to 10 years in federal prison. As you can see from these photos, this was a very large-scale fencing operation, and he had amassed a vast inventory of stolen goods at the time that the police and the Secret Service executed search warrants at his business and his storage locations. His operation was so successful that he was selling millions of dollars of goods on eBay over this time period. This case is important for multiple reasons. First, it highlights the importance of a partnership between local and federal law enforcement. A successful prosecution like this relies on good evidence, and CMPD officers and detectives worked side by side with U.S. Secret Service agents to investigate Barkley's operation, to execute the search warrants, and to gather the elements of proof we needed to prosecute. Equally important is that this case highlights how drugs and drug addiction impacts the community more broadly. The boosters were largely drug addicts. They were committing these crimes to get money to support their addiction. They targeted multiple businesses like Home Depot, Target, and Lowe's, and stole large ticket items, things like power tools, vacuum cleaners, and generators, knowing they could fence these goods for more money they used to buy drugs, including heroin and opioids. The Justice Department's primary mission is to protect the lives and safety of all Americans. That safety is being threatened by the unprecedented levels of opioid addiction in our communities. Effective prevention, treatment, and enforcement with cases like this is the key to a successful strategy to combat rampant drug abuse and drug-related criminal activity. All of us here are committed to working together to develop and implement strategies that work best for our community. Again, I want to thank CMPD and the District Attorney's Office for working so closely with Secret Service and the U.S. Attorney's Office to investigate this case that has had such a wide impact on our community, and I look forward to future partnership working these and other types of cases. I also want to thank all of the local retailers who also helped support this investigation. I'm now going to turn things over to Major Selvey, who's going to address CMPD's role. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. As you can see, really good work here. Just to give you a little bit of background on this, in July of 2018, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and the U.S. Secret Service Organized Crime Task Force received information about this operation. And it's important to note that that information came from one of our patrol detectives in the South Division, Detective Finocchio. Had done some outstanding work. He was really addressing some of this organized retail theft, and through his investigation, he identified this Tool King location on North Tryon Street as being the place where a lot of these items were going. So the investigation was launched to determine exactly what we were looking at, and investigators discovered Edwin Barkley was operating this multi-million-dollar eBay storefront out of his business at 5025 North Tryon Street. So during the course of the investigation, it was determined that Mr. Barkley would receive assistance from co-conspirators to steal, as was mentioned, heavy-duty tools and other items for local retailers. I think it was already mentioned Lowe's, Home Depot, and Target. These items were taken from these stores and then sometimes brought directly to the Tool King location on North Tryon Street, where Mr. Barkley would purchase the property for significantly lower prices, and then he would turn around and sell these brand new in-box items on his eBay store. And his eBay store was named Tool King USA. You just can't make some of this stuff up. So between August 2015 and October of 2018, investigators discovered that Tool King USA listed a total of over 19,000 items for sale, and they sold these items for more than $3 million. On October 10th of 2018, the Organized Crimes Task Force, along with representatives from South Division Patrol, North Tryon Patrol, all got together, and I want to mention also representatives from the different retailers, Home Depot, Lowe's, and Target also had people there to help identify some of the items that had been taken. All those units came together and served search warrants related to this. So search warrants were executed on 2 of Mr. Barkley's stores, the one that was fully operational and one that he was preparing to expand his sales. There were also 4 self-storage units located not too far from the Tool King location on North Tryon Street that were also searched. These search warrants, as you can see by the picture here, yielded 83 pallets full of 6,400 new in-box items with a total value of over $1 million. This seizure was the largest seizure of stolen merchandise measured by pallets, because when you get that much, that's about how you have to weigh it, in Home Depot history. And obviously, like the U.S. Attorney just stated, he was arrested and charged with interstate transportation of stolen property. I can't say enough about the fantastic work that went into this. Starting with patrol, which is the way so much of our work starts. That's the base of what we do. Really good patrol work. Then information sharing with our financial crimes unit, and then that information being shared with the Secret Service. Secret Service is here. They're very shy. Don't want a lot of credit. We could not have done it without them. And then, of course, our partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, really bringing this successfully to a close. So, like I said, just really good work. And if you have any questions that I can answer real quick, or the Secret Service can answer. Yes?
That's a lot of material. Did this stuff just walk out the door, or was it sent out the back door with accomplices, or how did it work?
You know, that's a really good question. And I can't address how every item was taken. A lot of stuff went right out the front door.
Anybody else for the Major, U.S. Attorney's Office, Secret Service on the operation?
You guys send out, which agency will send out a press release to make sure?
Yeah, we'll reinforce all this and support this with the images and the information that the Major and Assistant U.S. Attorney just outlined. We'll get it to you. We'll get it to you. Yes, copy. Thank you, Major. We, as promised, we have Deputy Chief Voorhees to discuss crime statistics. For anybody who's got questions concerning the first quarter numbers.
Deputy Chief, any idea what what's causing the increase in violent crime and murders? I know those are hard to pinpoint, but
Sure.
are you seeing any patterns?
There's usually a portion that are domestic related in terms of homicides and violent incidents. There's some that we just don't know. We don't know why people do that. Some are robbery related. We have those statistics for you, but I'll say generally, some of the things that we've seen are groups of young people specifically feuding with one another. And from some of the interviews that we've had with these people about what causes the feud, it's really minor things that you or I would probably just blow off. And unfortunately, they're using violence to kind of enhance their street credibility. That's kind of what we're seeing. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's kind of the reality of it.
You said, Chief, excuse me, guns involved in vast majority of these.
Roughly 90%, yes, sir.
They're using violence, and specifically they're using guns. What can we do to get the guns off the street?
Well, I think most citizens who own guns are law-abiding, but one of the things that we see continually are the number of guns that are stolen. The largest majority of those are stolen from people's homes in burglaries and larcenies and/or larcenies from autos. So if you have a gun, keep it locked up in a safe. If you have it in a car, keep it locked up in a safe in your car. Purchase those. It's worth it because I think most people who are law-abiding, who legally possess firearms, don't want it to be used in one of these incidents.
By way of follow-up, I'm not sure what the law says, but possession of a firearm by under, is it 21, under 21?
Yeah, possession of a firearm by a minor is a charge we can do. So these folks that have them, the young people, aren't allowed to legally. And some, actually being very young, are also felons, and they can't have a firearm in that case either.
Are we pushing hard enough on that, do you think? I mean, when I say police, prosecutors, I mean, are we pushing hard enough to make those, put the fear of God in them for having a gun when they're 17, 18, 19?
I know our agency does. We can't control the criminal justice system, but our partners with the feds, we prosecute a lot of gun cases, as we should. So if you're a prohibited person and you're in possession of a firearm, that may be the only charge we get you on, but that's good enough, and we'll take them state or federal based on what the right review of that case is. I will highlight some things, though, as I mentioned earlier, about mentors and parents and things like that. We had a great case recently where a grandmother saw a gun in a backpack. She was helping her kid or her grandson look for something for school, noticed this gun, and then based on her being nosy, which is what parents are supposed to do, guardians are supposed to do, she contacted us. We located the gun, and hopefully we prevented something that could have been a bad outcome. So kudos to her, and kudos to other people that are responsible like that and are nosy. That's our jobs as adults.
Can you give us a little more detail as far as numbers go on the number of guns involved? You said it's 90%. How many actually are there, and do you know what percentage of the guns were stolen?
I don't have those numbers in front of me. I know there's some percentage that are stolen.
Is it most? Is it just
I wouldn't say most, but it depends on the types of crimes. A lot of these incidents, people are not prohibited persons. They can legally possess a firearm, and so the key is, why do you use a gun to respond to something that, in many cases, is just a slight? It's something that we blow off, and instead of taking it personal, we have aggravated assault incidents almost every week on the interstates, on our roads from road rage. Somebody gets cut off, and they don't know how to handle that, and so they respond in an aggressive manner. We end up taking the report for assault by pointing a gun, or worse. We've had some shootings where somebody takes a round in their car, and and that's not right. It's just not right. It's not legal. It's not ethical. It's not what should happen. It's helpful to wave to people when you mess up and admit it, and hopefully let it go.
Chief, can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned the review of it, is it all ADW cases, or can you talk a little bit more about that? When did you guys start doing it? And
Sure. So about a month ago is one of the things that we were trying to get as a process, because when you see an incident, you want to know, is it related to another incident? And we have crime analysis work all those. But instead of waiting for analysis product, you do it every day. So if somebody's a victim of a shooting, we want to know why they were targeted. Many times it's because they might be involved in criminal activity as well. And so if they're engaged in, say, something like drugs, and we think that's the motive for being targeted, we may decide to have an officer go knock on that person's door as a victim and say, hey, can we talk to you? Why were you being targeted? Do follow-ups, do canvasses later. Whatever those specific things that supervisor believes will be helpful. And it lets all the parties know involved in these incidents that we're aware of them and that we're trying to impact them. And in many cases, we'll make arrests and try to glean cooperation on that case and other cases and get more information so we can prevent future incidents from occurring.
You said about a month ago you guys started?
Roughly 5 or 6 weeks, yes.
Do you think because of this violent, increase in violent crime and the number of aggravated assault victims, is the general public, you know, more in danger of being hit by a stray bullet like we saw the shootouts on the streets and things like that?
Well, based on the numbers, there's more incidents of gunfire this year than last. So you'd have to say that there's more of a chance because, you know, bullets don't know where they're going. It's where the gun's aimed, and unfortunately, you see tragic outcomes. And we're, you know, as number of cases that we investigate involving guns and gunfire, you know, it's a credit to our hospital system and our EMS system that saves a lot of people. But we need cooperation, and many times, unfortunately, we find that the victims aren't cooperative, and it's hard to get to the bottom of it. But I think overall we do a really good job of that in this city, and I don't want to see that culture shift where we just don't get cooperation anymore, because then you're really losing the battle.
Chief, do you have any updated numbers on the circumstances behind the 33? I know a couple of weeks ago we'd gotten like how many were robberies, how many new, just to get a sense as to how many new there.
Sure. 6 were domestic violence related, 4 were drug related, 5 were robbery related, 7 stemmed from arguments, 10 involved just basically we don't know why that happened, unable to determine at this time, and then we had an officer involved shooting last Monday. So that's 33 versus 10.
And do you have a comparison to 2 years ago? I think it's up from 2 years ago too, right?
I don't have that with me, but we can certainly look at that, sure. Anybody else?
What was working last year, because the numbers were higher the previous year, what was working last year that might not be working this year, or I know you can't control people.
We can't, nor is it prudent to compare one year to the other. We look more longitudinal, a longer time period. We've been seeing a decrease for the last 2 decades. So we're making some headway. Unfortunately, when you look numerically, we had a low year last year. It's a blessing that we had fewer people who were murdered, who died, but this year we're shifting otherwise. It's just, unfortunately, all people want to talk about the numbers, but I can tell you 33 families are tragically impacted. So the numbers are what people get measured by and what people want to talk about. It's the lives lost that matter to us. So it's a natural progression. Sometimes the numbers go up, sometimes they go down, but overall for the last couple of decades we've been having a lot of success. And this year, unfortunately, we're having a lot more tragedies occur.
Hey, Chief, I was going to ask this to the DC, but
sure, I can get him back up here.
I'll ask you also. Of all of these numbers, the homicides, the shootings, etc., what stands out to you? What should people be alarmed about?
For me, what stands out most is the struggle to get good information so that we can close some of the cases. Last year we were happy to say, you know, in excess of 80% of the time we were closing. This year we're not quite there, and ultimately we're having a lot of young people who don't want to talk about, victims we're talking about, don't want to talk about the circumstances. He said 10. They don't want to talk about the circumstances in which they were shot. So all we can do is assume that there's some issues going on that we need to break through culturally, because if you're not going to help us bring people to justice, we're going to have a lot of families who are suffering who never get closure. That's really the biggest takeaway for me right now, is the lack of cooperation to close some of these cases.
Sure.
Looking at the circumstances that the DC mentioned, I don't know how to ask this except to say, how is this a police matter? Like, can you police, can you stop? The numbers are going up, but as a law enforcement agency, what can you do?
If this were a police matter, we would have zero. We would have zero. As far as people who decide to shoot someone because they cut you off in traffic or they say something disrespectful, That's not something the police can control. Truly, it's about humanity. It's a human issue. And you see people who don't value human life. Unfortunately, that is not something that police can inject themselves into. The Deputy Chief Voorhees also talked about mentoring. He talked about having adults care more for young people. 542 young people got diverted out of the system because CMPD cares. So we try to do all we can, but it's much bigger than us. If you don't care about human life, it's hard for the police or any other institution to create that level of empathy. So I think therein lies our difficulty. We can only do so much, and right now we're reacting to a lot more violence than we have recently.
One that sticks out to me, Chief, the two young men that were shot and killed on or about Moorhead Street. They were arrested the previous year in the paintball shootings. It seems like an escalation to gun violence from that. Is that the mentorship, the diversion? How can that specifically play into affecting the lives of those teenagers that are now dead?
What we see is we're teaching life skills and conflict resolution skills. We're teaching people how to verbally communicate so that they don't escalate. Our issue is if you have a culture of violence, people aren't going to talk. They're going to pull a trigger. And unfortunately, that's what our young people are doing at higher numbers than we've seen over the last few years.
Yes, sir. Unrelated question, but wanted to ask you for your thoughts on the sheriff's recent activity and statements about expanding what he's doing.
Regarding traffic enforcement?
Traffic enforcement and his statement that his desire is to do everything that you guys do except respond to 911 calls.
What I can tell you is if any entity in this county wants to be a force multiplier, welcome to the party. I think it's a benefit to the community. He and I just talked this morning. I believe as long as we're continuing to work as partners to prevent crime, which is our mission, and to make people safer, I welcome it. I appreciate it, actually. If he wants to involve other sheriffs in the region to do work collaboratively, let's go. Let's go.
Chief, can I bring you back to stats? Are you getting feedback from the community? What are people saying? Are people expressing, are they afraid to go out?
Very
Are they?
good question. Here's what I'll tell you. What I'm seeing is people, even organizations that used to focus more on police, call for a stop in violence. They're shouting more about what we see, young people resorting to violence when talking through it would have been a resolution. So we even have activists now who are starting to have that message where it was really us, like a voice in the dark. They're actually starting to say, hey, we got to be more responsible. We got to police ourselves. And a part of that is we got to put these guns down and start talking and communicating.
Does it make the role, Chief, of neighbors, family members, other members of the community, is their role more important? Can they do anything to help because of this increase in violence? Are there specific things you can tell them?
As you heard Deputy Chief Voorhees say, he was talking specifically about a prime example. A mother sees a child with a gun and takes action. That's the biggest way to do it. A nosy neighbor is your best neighbor. We need to get proactive in making sure people aren't carrying guns, especially illegally, so that we can take care of it. Young people don't have the level of discernment to make decisions, so they should not be arming themselves and solving minor disputes with violence. All right? Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief. And just to clarify, I know there were a couple of questions that were kind of looming. David, you had a question concerning the 2017 quarterly, first quarter, 23 homicides, first quarter in 2017. Somebody, I believe it was Scott, had a question concerning the clearance rate. Our current clearance rate is 70% right now. And someone in the room made actually a pretty good observation. There is a Tool King USA involved in this operation that we're talking about, and there is a Tool King that's based here locally as well. The Tool King is not affiliated whatsoever with that criminal operation that was being investigated. It was Tool King USA. Important distinction there. We don't want to imply that Tool King is involved in any kind of criminal activity. Colleen, quickly.
Clarify for me, the 5 robberies, would those be, would that be considered like people who didn't know the assailant, or?
No, that doesn't qualify as a robbery, and I'll go back and circle back, but known parties can rob one another. It doesn't have to be an unknown. It would be my assumption, and I don't want to assume, but that they are considering most of our homicides involve known parties and acquaintances. Again, though, I don't want to go on assumption. Let me double back and nail that down for you to make sure that we're accurate there.
DC's first name Coerte.
Sorry?
DC's first name Coerte, Kurt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Coerte, Voorhees, Voorhees, and he's the deputy chief.
I think there's just one other brother. I don't know.
Coerte.
And Voorhees,
According to Outlook, they tell me something different, but Mark Becker could be right. Anybody else for the greater good?
Lake Wiley.
Lake Wiley.
Completely different, obviously. Any updates on the victim who was found in Lake Wiley?
Still working to make positive identification through the medical examiner's office. We thought we'd have some idea as to what direction this was going in sometime yesterday. I understand it may be today. That's still somewhat ambitious from what I'm hearing through the grapevine. I know that we're working closely, as our investigators are, with the medical examiner's office, and they're working diligently to make positive identification.
I just thought of one more thing. The shooting last Thursday, as of when we spoke with the lieutenant last Thursday, he said they didn't anticipate any more arrests. Is that still the case?
Yes, at this point, yeah, we have 3 people in custody concerning that shooting, and she's referencing that Thursday shooting over on North Tryon Street. That young mother, 3 people in custody, and we don't envision at this point any additional suspects being charged.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it.